War and Peace. So, finally, to America fighting in the actual war. The thing is, when the United States entered the war, the Allied position was really bad. For the last 3 years, they had been fighting in trench warfare. This had been sapping their military strength and their civilian morale. And more than anything else, the Allies just needed more men. And so Congress will set up the Selective Service Act of 1917, which would establish conscriptions. We're going to see more than 24 million men eventually register for the draft. 3 million of them will be drafted, and you get another 2 million men volunteering to fight. A lot of these Americans that fought in World War I, many of them were foreign born, and you get a lot of Native Americans joining in too. Now, when it comes to training and actual units, sometimes they would be ethnically segregated, but really you're going to see racial segregation much more rigid during this time period. And black soldiers and sailors are going to be put in the most menial positions. That being said, we're actually going to see of the 4 African American units under French command during this war, 3 of them were given the highest citations for valor. We also see women playing an important role as well as non-combatant personnel. A lot of times they would be given the equal rank of males performing the same tasks. The problem was these women had no formal military status, and that basically meant they were ineligible for benefits. So once again, you see the skills and contributions of women being devalued. But then let's join in the actual troops coming into France. They're going to land initially in June of 1917, but then they're going to have to train for months there. They have to learn trench warfare. And so really, when we're looking at a full-scale American intervention in the war, that doesn't really start until about 1918. So think about how Germany started their unrestricted submarine warfare going, oh, it'll take a while for America to get going, and that is true to a certain extent. Granted, America was helping in a lot of other ways a lot faster than just men. Now, these men are going to be part of the AEF. This is the American Expeditionary Force, and they are really going to be the force that helps defeat German advances. These men are what really tip the balance toward an Allied victory. The thing is, when you look at the Eastern front of the war, that's Russia versus Germany, basically what happened in Russia was a Bolshevik faction of the communist movement managed to seize power in November of 1917 under Lenin, and they signed an armistice with Germany. And so this means that Russia's no longer in the war on the Allied side. They've stepped back. And so this frees up a lot of those German troops for a summer offensive against France and Britain and now the United States. Really quick, before I get into more of the fighting, I want to talk a little bit more about Russia. The thing is, the United States did not want Russia to become a communist nation. And so the United States did, during this time, try to militarily intervene in the Russian government. And in fact, the United States would try to remain in Russia after Germany surrenders in 1918. And we actually managed to stay there until about 1920. And so this is going to contribute to Russian distrust of the West that you can really say permeates through all the way to today. So back to the Western Front, though, and the actual fighting. We're going to see the Allies are more successful there. They're going to launch their own advances, and we're going to see decisive battles when Americans are involved, that they're going to attack German trenches, and they're going to advance steadily despite their inexperience with things like poison gas and heavy artillery. You have battles that rage for weeks, but the thing is, Americans were just so much more fresh than all of the other troops, and their sheer numbers overwhelmed the Germans. And so it's in this way that the AEF is going to help the British and the French defeat their enemy. And this is when Germany asked for peace. We're going to see that on November 11th of 1918, an armistice will end the Great War. It's crazy. They have this whole symbolic thing. The 11th day of the 11th month and the 11th hour is when the armistice begins. What's crazy is they could have stopped it like days earlier and lost maybe that like symbolic impact and actually saved like thousands of lives. But there you go. Anyway, by the end of this all, you have dead 8 million soldiers, 7 million civilians, and of those, only 115,000 were Americans. So then the peace treaty. Before I can get into the actual peace treaty, I want to talk a little bit about America's position and objectives, especially Woodrow Wilson's objectives. So the thing is, Woodrow Wilson is going to make these objectives known in a message to Congress in what comes to be known as the 14 points. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and America's 14 points were basically advocating for a more democratic world system and basically how to achieve that system. And so this was all about reassuring the American people that the Allies were fighting more for, you know, democracy than for like imperialistic gains. So 8 of these 14 points propose the creation of new nations, you know, shifting old borders, ensuring self-determination for the people that had been previously like subject to the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the German Empire or even the Russian Empire. 8 of the principles are going to be basically principles to guide international relations. So it's going to be things like freedom of the seas, open diplomacy rather than having all these secret treaties, a reduction of armaments, free trade and free settlement of colonial claims. Now, if you're doing count, 8 plus 5, that's 13. So what about the last one? The 14th point was considered the most important point, especially by like Woodrow Wilson. This basically proposed a League of Nations. And this League of Nations would basically carry out all of these ideals and basically ensure international stability. Now the thing is, the 14 points were really America's idea. They were never explicitly accepted by the Allied powers, which means when you actually get to framing the final peace treaty after the war is over, things get difficult. Because Woodrow Wilson's wanting to promote, you know, this international stability and these high ideals and everything, but a lot of the Allied powers just wanted to get everything from Germany that they could. They wanted tangible compensation, not pious principles. And so Woodrow Wilson is going to attend the peace conference in Paris. And actually, while he's doing this, 1918 voters are going to give Republicans control of both the houses in Congress. So really, this peace treaty that comes out is going to be Woodrow Wilson's vision. Well, a little bit. But that means that the Republicans who are now in control of Congress felt no responsibility to actually approve it. So the actual treaty is going to be extremely one-sided. You have like the Central Powers and Bolshevik Russia were completely excluded from forming this treaty. And really, America has already broken 2 of the 14 points by the time we get to forming this treaty. They had acquiesced British rejection of freedom of the seas, and we had sent United States troops to try to intervene on Russia, which would have violated the whole point of self-determination. If we were really for self-determination, we wouldn't have tried to intervene when they were trying to make a communist nation, even if we didn't like that. That's their choice to make a communist nation, was the idea. So we get the final peace terms made, and Germany will sign the Treaty of Versailles on June 28th of 1919 under protest. The terms of the treaty are much more severe than Woodrow Wilson had proposed or Germany had anticipated. Basically, Germany had to accept sole responsibility for starting the war, which is a big deal because, yes, they might have played a larger role in starting the war than others, but they were not the sole reason the war started. On top of that, Germany had to therefore pay huge reparations to the Allies. They had to give up land to France, Poland, Belgium, Denmark. They had to cede their territories. They had to limit their army and their navy to basically small self-defense forces. Oh, sorry about that. And they had to destroy like military bases and promise not to manufacture or purchase armaments. Other parts of the peace settlement are going to include things like recognizing new nations. And you can see this from before versus after the war on this map here. And so you see new nations like Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. But as much as you might be going, oh, that's, more democratic, people get to decide for themselves what kind of, policies in these governments and everything like that, you still get different nations like France, Italy, Romania, and Japan all annexing territory in regardless of the wishes of its inhabitants, just like, America had done with Hawaii back during the Spanish-American War. Allied leaders are going to endorse these changes of Eastern Europe because these new states would be anti-communist, and they basically saw them as a barrier against like Bolshevism and communism and everything. There was a lot of concerns about communist movements during this time period. And so by having the formation of these new nations, there was this hope that they might isolate and weaken Bolshevik Russia. They are also going to build in a League of Nations into this treaty. Article 10 of the treaty is going to bound all the member nations to guarantee each other's independence, thus collective security. However, this is going to be problematic when it comes to the United States.